Good morning, everyone. So last week there was a big football game on TV, and Nani and I were talking about it. We were talking about the game, and of course he was looking forward to the game. He's a Kansas City Chiefs fan, so he's had a very good week this week. But one of the things that I was telling him in regards to the Super Bowl was I was looking forward to the commercials. Obviously, we know that when the Super Bowl comes on, if you've ever watched it, the commercials are always a little something extra. And so you actually look forward to the commercial breaks in that game because of the creativity. Now, some of them get a little out there, but for the most part, I find the creativity of those commercials pretty interesting. Nani asked me, though, why would you look forward to the commercials? Well, I think hopefully we understand that now. There was one commercial, if you watch the game, that has generated some conversation this week. And I think that was actually the point of the commercial. I watched with interest the commercials for the He Gets Us campaign. Now, if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, over the past couple of years, this organization, and they say that they're not affiliated with any church or anything like that. They list themselves as their own organization with a purpose. And I'm not going to go into all their, everything that's available on their website and all of those types of things. I just want to talk about the ad that I saw this year that's generated. Sorry, I didn't even have this turned on. That's generated so much conversation. So this organization, He Gets Us, the He is talking in reference to Jesus. Jesus gets us. And I don't know what all they imply by that, but I tend to believe what they mean by that is that Jesus understands us. That's what I'm going to take from that. Now, last year's commercial from this organization dealt with the strife in our country between opposing groups. It was actually kind of a discordant commercial because they were showing images of people, politicians, what have you, groups at odds with each other, just yelling at each other. But over the top of the images was, I think it was a Patsy Cline song. It was some very smooth song. And so as you were watching the commercial, you got the sense that there's something not right here. The music is not showing what's happening, and it was made to make you think about it. Well, this year's commercial, they had two, but the longer of the two was a series of images that showed people washing one another's feet. Now, the images did have somewhat of a modern political bent to them. I will grant you that. Some of them were images that may seem kind of innocuous to us. I believe there was a son washing a father's feet. And these are all in a modern context, I might add that. So there was a son in a living room washing what we assume is his father's feet at the dinner table. There were other ads, though, that were definitely more message-driven, made to make you think about what you were seeing. For instance, there was an image of a woman who was obviously had been involved in a protest outside an abortion clinic. And she had set down her sign, or she had left the group that she was protesting with, presumably, and she had gone to a young lady that was either going into or coming out of this clinic. And it showed her washing the feet of this woman. There was another one that showed a police officer in an alley washing the feet of a young Black man. So you can see some of the modern kind of political implications of this commercial. Again, much discussion has been had over this past week, and probably sermons being preached this morning about this ad campaign, either for or against, people saying that the message was very clear, or that the message didn't go far enough. But I will say this. I saw a video of one of the creators, one of the people involved in these ad campaigns, and what he said was just, we're not trying to tell the entire gospel story in this 60-second ad. What we are trying to do is we're trying to generate conversation. Well, mission accomplished, because many people are having conversations about these commercials. Again, I don't want to go into everything that this organization believes or what I think they believe or anything like that. But what I do want to read in preparation for what we're going to talk about, you're probably wondering, what in the world does this have to do with Epaphroditus? We're getting there. But I did want to read from their website their rationale for this commercial about foot washing, and especially why foot washing in all of these modern contexts, because it seems we don't wash each other's feet today. We all wear shoes. We don't need to wash feet. So I just want to read this and use this as a springboard for maybe some thoughts this morning. They write about this ad campaign. As we thought about what to do for this year's commercial, we reflected on our 2023 Super Bowl TV spot, which was, the theme was love your enemies. That's the spot with the people yelling at each other. That commercial was all about hate and division. Ultimately, it was about pride. Pride says, I'm right and you're wrong. Every image depicted people in a state of prideful contention, whether it be politicians yelling in a debate or parents fighting at a youth football game. So we thought that maybe this year we should focus on the thematic inverse of last year's commercial, one built on the premise of love and unity. And with an upcoming election year that will be filled with division and derision, and I would dare say, is an interjection, it's already getting there, we decided to focus on one of the most important directives given by Jesus: love your neighbor. As we explored creative ideas, we recalled the story of Jesus washing his disciples' feet and realized that this was the perfect example of how we should treat one another, even those people with whom we don't see eye to eye. Jesus had washed Peter's feet, a loyal friend who would publicly deny that he knew Jesus later that very night. And even more astoundingly, Jesus washed Judas Iscariot's feet, the one who would betray him for 30 pieces of silver. So why did Jesus wash the feet of both friends and foes? What was he teaching them then and us today? They go on to talk about the need for foot washing in that time, that foot washing is a servant's task. In those days, people walked around with sandals on their feet. And so when they came to a home or a location, their feet needed to be washed so that they weren't tracking in dirt and dust and all of those types of things. And it helped to care for the feet. There was some hygienic value to it as well. But inherent in foot washing, and they talk about this in their description, inherent in foot washing is someone has to kneel in front of someone else in order to accomplish this task. And this is a task that is generally relegated to servants. The lowest of the low in a household is the one that's undertaking this task, because it's feet, it's dirt, it's grime, it's the stuff that builds up on roadways. And in a society that uses horses and mules, I don't think we need to go into detail about what builds up on roadways. And so there's an uncleanness to it. There's an impurity to it. And the person that would have to do this would be getting up close and personal with that dirt, grime, and nastiness. They continue. In this instance, the disciples that were there with Jesus, the disciples whose feet he was washing, the disciples considered Jesus not only to be their master or religious leader, but also most even revered him as the promised Messiah, a long-awaited king who would, according to their prophecy, deliver Israel from its oppressors,
And in this time period, the Romans, when Jesus offered to wash his disciples' feet, it was so antithetical to their way of thinking that some, Peter, initially declined his offer. But Jesus explained, "Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet." Now, what they're referencing there is John chapter 13. You can feel free to turn over there for just a moment. We'll look at some passages very quickly. John chapter 13. It's probably hard to see, so if you want to look in your Bibles. We're not going to read the whole passage, but just hitting some high points of the chapter and the event that's happening here. I find it interesting, the description of Jesus before he goes through this event. In John 13:1, we read, "Before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world to the Father." Jesus knows that this is the end of his time on earth. He has come to the climax of his ministry and his life here among his people. And what does he do? Well, verse 3, Jesus knew that the Father had given everything into his hands, that he had come from God, and that he was going back to God. This is a summary, I believe, of what we read in John chapter 1. Jesus, the Creator, came to live among his people. He dwelt among us, and even though we didn't recognize him, he still served. And he was the face and the voice of God amongst his creation. He knew that the Father had given everything into his hands. He is the heir to the throne of heaven. He is the Prince of glory. He is the King of kings. And the very next verse, the King of kings, John chapter 13 and verse 4. So, I think that word's so important because Jesus recognized all of these things. And in light of all of those things, the King of kings got up from supper and laid aside his robe and took a towel and tied it around himself. Next, he poured water into a basin and he began to wash his disciples' feet and to dry them with the towel tied around him. He knew that the Father had given everything into his hands. And so what does he do? Does he go into the town square and proclaim his glory? Does he go into the town square and yell at everyone about how he is the Passover? He is the King who was to come. He is the Messiah who they should be looking for, and all should bow down and revere him and fall down at his feet in worship. No. He got down on his knees and he washed the feet of his disciples. No other rabbi in this day who had accrued a following would do this. It is completely out of the realm of thought that a rabbi would do this for his disciples. Once Jesus accomplishes this task, we read further in the chapter, when Jesus had washed their feet and put on his robe, he reclined again and he said to them, "Do you understand?" So common to Jesus, after he got done with a parable or a teaching or even some action or miracle that he performed, he would look again to his disciples and he would hope that there was a question in their mind. And so he wants to get straight to that point because he knows he doesn't have much time left. Do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord. This is well said, for I am, parentheses, both of those things. I am your teacher. I am your Lord. So, if your Lord and teacher, if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done for you. Now Jesus takes it a step further. I gave you the example. I'm giving you the teaching. Now I'm giving you the command. I give you a new command. Love one another, just as I have loved you. And I think inherent in that statement is in the manner and the extent to which I have loved you. Just as I have loved you, you must also love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. And I think, again, if we're thinking through that statement, if they do not love one another, A, they are not his disciples, and B, other people cannot come to know him. His apostles, his disciples, are getting ready to be his emissaries in his physical absence. He's giving them a task to go on. And before he ever tells them, go into the world preaching and teaching, he tells them, go into the world and serve one another. I think that's very key. That prior to teaching and preaching, you've got to be a person who serves. And I think all of these are things that Jesus is getting at. Now, we've been involved in our study of the book of Philippians on Sunday mornings. It's been a great study. I commend Matt for leading us in that and really helping us to discuss and work through the book. And I'm so glad that he's taken the time to do that with us and allow us the time to speak, even though he probably wants to cover more ground every time we talk. We need that time. We need that time to think through things and to work through things together. So as we've gone through the book of Philippians, one of the main points that Paul has emphasized over and over again is the selflessness that has to characterize his church and each of us as members of it. If there is no selflessness that displays this type of love that Jesus has just called his disciples to, then the church will not work. The church will fall apart and the world will not come to know Christ. It is essential that we, as members of this church, as the stones of this tabernacle, put aside self for the benefit of the greater purpose. And so Paul reminds us then in Philippians 2, do nothing. Now that doesn't leave out anything, does it? Do nothing out of rivalry or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourselves. If this is the basis of every interaction we undertake, then good can only result from it. Everyone should look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interest of others. And we know in that famous passage that he goes on in Philippians chapter 2 to give us the ultimate example. I heard a preacher describe this the other day as the top shelf of examples. That if we're looking up, then this is the key. Jesus Christ is the example, as we just saw in John 13. Make your own attitude like that of Christ Jesus, who, existing in the form of God, did not consider equality with God as something to be used for his own advantage, or some translations might say something to be held on to, something to be carried out over his disciples. Instead, he emptied himself by assuming the form of a slave and taking on the likeness of men. And I think it's key in that for us to understand. He emptied himself. This is a voluntary action. It's consistent with the will of his Father, but he voluntarily did it for us, for our good. And when he did it, when he took on the likeness of men, and when he had come as a man in his external form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Now, we think foot washing is humiliating. We could talk all day long about how that servant's work. But when an individual was put on a cross by the Romans didn't put their own people on a cross. Romans weren't crucified. Other people were crucified, other nations that were beneath Rome, individuals that were of no standing, individuals that were meant to be reviled and used as an example of ridicule and scorn. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross, a death of revision. Jesus is the perfect model of sacrificial service, Paul points out to us. Now, immediately after this section, we get two individuals that are mentioned in this letter, and I don't think that this is coincidental. When Paul writes his letters, I've said this before, Paul writes very intentionally. His language is intentional, and everything he includes in a letter is all done with purpose, and usually to the theme of whatever he's writing. And so immediately after this section, where Jesus is given as the example of service and humility, debasing himself even to the point of death, we get these two individuals. Now, the first individual we're very familiar with, hopefully, and that is Timothy. We know much about Timothy, and I don't want to take away from Timothy by not mentioning him at length in this lesson, but I want to focus on this other individual, Epaphroditus. And again, Matt has led us in this class, but in light of this Super Bowl ad that is really meant to be a thought piece about service and about how we serve to one another, and more importantly, to what extent we serve one another, I feel like in Epaphroditus, we have a figurehead for this type of service. And what's ironic about this figurehead is we don't know anything else about him. Not much is known about Epaphroditus other than the fact that he's one of the Christians from the Philippian church. We can infer based on his name that he is not a Jew. Epaphroditus comes from, you can hear it in the word, or in his name, Aphrodite, Epi-Aphrodite, to Aphrodite. So it's possible that even in his younger days, he may have been dedicated to the Greek pagan deity of love. Some subtle irony there, right? But Epaphroditus is a member of the Philippian church. And we read in Philippians 4:18 that he had been sent with a gift to Paul from the Philippian brethren. Paul is in prison at this point. It's unclear whether he's in Rome or Caesarea or wherever he is. It doesn't matter. Paul is in prison. And the Philippians have heard about Paul's imprisonment, and so they send Epaphroditus with some sort of aid or supply or need to go to Paul. Now, despite what we don't know about Epaphroditus, we don't know his socioeconomic status. We don't know his personal background. We don't know his occupation. We don't know even his place within the Philippian church. Is he an elder? Is he is he a deacon? Is he an evangelist? We don't know anything about him. But what we do know about him is based on what Paul says. I don't think it's important that we know about Paul's background, or not Paul, Epaphroditus' background, because what Epaphroditus then becomes for us is an everyman. What we're about to read about Epaphroditus is something that any one of us can do. That is so important. He doesn't have to be an elder in the church. He doesn't have to be an affluent member of society. He could be the lowest of the low, and yet he can still carry out this task for the benefit of Paul and the Philippian brethren. So here's what we do know then, based on what we read here in Philippians chapter 2. Let's look at Philippians 2 for just a moment and see the description of this individual. And then we'll make some points and the lesson will be yours. Philippians 2, verse 25. I considered it necessary to send you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier, as well as your messenger and minister to my need, since he has been longing for all of you and was distressed because you heard that he was sick. Indeed, he was so sick that he nearly died. However, God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but also on me, so that I would not have one grief on top of another. For this reason, I am very eager to send him so that you may rejoice when you see him again, and I may be less anxious. Therefore, welcome him in the Lord with all joy, and hold men like him in honor, because he came close to death for the work of Christ, risking his life to make up what was lacking in your ministry to me. So what do we know about Epaphroditus? Well, again, we've already mentioned he's the individual sent by the Philippian brethren with supplies and support to meet Paul's need. Now, I think we can infer some things based on just that description alone, that he was the one that was chosen. First of all, on the part of the Philippian brethren, Epaphroditus is a person who can be counted on to go. When there's a need that needs to be met, and that need is somewhere that it's going to take some effort to get to, Epaphroditus is the type of individual that will step up and he will say, I'm ready to go. I was hoping Joe was here so that I could make this reference. If you've ever seen the movie or read the book, The Lord of the Rings, at the beginning of the quest of the Fellowship of the Ring, they've got the one ring, the ring of power, the ring of basically the evil ring that needs to be destroyed. And as they're in council trying to figure out who's going to take this ring to destroy it, all the parties are bickering over who's going to do it or how the ring could be used or who deserves to do it or any of those things. And in the midst of that argument, one small, literally small individual, Frodo the Hobbit, steps up and says, I will go. I will take the ring to Mordor, the place where it's to be destroyed, even though I don't know the way. That type of individual that says, I don't have all the details here, and I don't know what all's going to happen, but I will go. I will be the one to do it. That's the type of individual that we need in the Lord's church. Here am I, send me. I think another thing that we can infer from Epaphroditus being sent on this mission is the fact that he can be trusted with the aid. We presume that this is some sort of monetary aid that Timothy is sending to Paul. The fact is that Epaphroditus is the type of individual that can be trusted with this monetary aid. We've already seen, even among Jesus' disciples, that some who were trusted with the money were taking some off the top or using it for personal means. Epaphroditus is the type of individual that can be entrusted with this gift being sent from a group of people who have sacrificially provided it. And he won't use this gift for his own devices or skim anything off the top. He's someone who can be entrusted with it. And he's someone who is entrusted to see the task through. If the road gets hard, if the weather gets bad, if circumstances get adverse, Epaphroditus is the individual who's going to see the task through to the end. And again, I'm inferring all of these things, but there's a reason I believe that he's the one that's entrusted to do this. And one last thing, I think, is he's one who is counted on to see the task through. He doesn't just carry the gift to Paul and drop it at his feet and then head back to Philippi. He spends time with Paul. He works with Paul, and he goes above and beyond in service to Paul. How do I know that? Well, I know that based on the description that Paul gives. Paul esteems Epaphroditus very highly. Remember, Paul doesn't use any descriptors lightly. When he includes a description of an individual, he means every word of it. So this is not hyperbole when Paul describes Epaphroditus. He says that he is a brother. He shares in mutual faith. That he is a co-worker. That he has participated in mutual work. He's willing to put his hands to the task as he meets with Paul and works with him. Paul also calls him a fellow soldier. As Epaphroditus is working with Paul, we already know Paul's in prison. He is suffering hardship on behalf of the gospel. Epaphroditus is a fellow soldier who is willing to endure those mutual hardships alongside Paul. And then he finally says that Epaphroditus is your messenger and minister to my need. Epaphroditus carried out his mission to bring this aid, and again, he went above and beyond in service to Paul and to the Philippian brethren in carrying this task out. But what we also read here is that in the course of this service, he became deathly ill. In verses 26 and 27, Paul says that he became ill. And again, I don't think that this detail is included without meaning. He became ill to the point of death. Now, Paul has already described Jesus as going to the cross, even death on a cross. Here's an individual that is willing to take this to its very end to accomplish the task. Now, Epaphroditus seems to be distressed by this illness, but he's not distressed because of the fact that he has the illness or any of the complications that have come to him personally from the illness. His distress is for the Philippian brethren. Now, how about Paul saying each of us ought to esteem others as more important than himself? Epaphroditus is now the example of that statement. His distress is for the Philippian brethren and the fact that he might not be able to make it back to them. And so he desires earnestly to get back to Philippi, not so that he can be back in a place of comfort, but so that he can comfort the people in that place. When they hear about his illness, he's worried that they're going to be both distressed and potentially discouraged by it. And so I really do think, and again, this is an inference here, but based on the description that we have here, maybe one reason that Epaphroditus is so desperate to get back to the brethren in Philippi was so that he could personally let them know that all of the hardship that he went through was worth it. Everything I did and everything that happened to me was worth it because mission accomplished. That's the type of individual that Epaphroditus is. Well, what takeaways can we take from this example of this individual who's only mentioned here in this brief few verses? Well, first of all, I think as we just saw, Epaphroditus has a concern for the church. And by the church, I mean the brethren with whom he is serving. He loves the brethren at Philippi, and he loves the members of the Lord's church at large. So much so that he's willing to serve all of the above with everything that he has. Do we love the Lord's church? Do we love the Lord's church here in this place and the brethren as members of it? And are we willing to put that love into action? Are we willing to show that love to one another? Do we desire to be with one another? And are we concerned at the distress that it might cause our brethren when we don't, or when we're not able to? I'm not suggesting that when we're ill, we should come to meet with the brethren. We do need to take care of our physical ailments. I think the past month has definitely been key to that for many of our members. We want everyone to be healthy. But how much importance does Epaphroditus place on being with the Lord's people? The second thing I think that we can take from Epaphroditus' example is his concern for the cause of Christ. Although Epaphroditus is very concerned with his brethren, I think all of that stems from his love for Christ and for the furtherance of the gospel. If Christ is not the basis for the type of love that Epaphroditus shows, then it is only based on Epaphroditus himself. If our love is only based on ourselves, then when ourselves go or when ourselves are mistreated, so is that love. And that love falls away. Our love must be based on the bigger picture. And Epaphroditus seems to be that type of individual who has that bigger picture in mind. Consequentially, I didn't have this in mind as I was preparing this, but we talked this morning about two individuals who later in this very book seem to be at odds with one another. And that led to a discussion this morning about our conflicts with one another as brethren, and how those conflicts can sometimes devolve into personal attacks rather than us coming to a common understanding and to a common faith as we work through those difficulties together. When our personal esteem takes precedence over our esteem for Christ and his followers, then none of this will work. Epaphroditus, also another thing that I think that we can take from him, his effort putting his concern into action on behalf of Christ and his beloved brethren. It's not just that Epaphroditus had an inward esteem for everyone and a regard for everyone that he only had internally so that he felt good feelings about everyone. Epaphroditus put this love into action, and he did it using his talents and his skills to carry that love out and to be sure that the task was done. And so then, one other thing that we can learn from Epaphroditus, not of ourselves, but as we consider our brethren, the honor that was due, as Paul says, to Epaphroditus and to those that are like him who esteem others more highly than themselves. As we're working together, it behooves us to look at one another and to look at one another's example, to find examples among our own selves of people who are exemplifying this type of sacrificial and active faith and service. And brothers and sisters, when I look among this group, I see that. But as Paul writes to the Thessalonian brethren, I would exhort us to excel still more in it. Amongst you in both big and, let me put it this way, seemingly big and little ways, the love of Christ is on display. I see it in what we would perceive as big ways, people conducting Bible studies, people being willing to go door to door, people being willing to do what we would say are big things. But I see it in little ways as well. I see it in people holding doors. I see it in people showing deference to one another in conversation. I see it in people being willing to share a meal with someone or take a meal to someone or do those little things. I see it in your attitude. Friends, we're to honor one another in those big and little things. And in so doing, that esteem that we have for one another will only grow and grow and grow, just as it seems to have been in Epaphroditus and Paul's esteem of Epaphroditus. I've asked Logan to lead as the closing song, the servant song this morning. I just want to go through the lyrics of this song very quickly before we sing it. And I pray that as we do, that we'll consider in the big picture of things what it means for us to be servants of Jesus Christ and carrying out that mission as his emissaries in this world. Make me a servant, just like your son, for he was a servant. Please make me one. Make me a servant. Do what you must do to make me a servant. Make me like you. Make me a servant. Take all my pride, for I would be lowly and humble inside, giving to others with all that I do in love for my brother. Make me like you. Make me a servant, filled by your might, and may all my labors shine with your light. Show me your footsteps and what I should do, and now and forever, make me like you. We're going to sing this song now, and I pray if you have a need, please let us know, and we would be delighted to serve you in whatever way we can as we stand and sing.